We're going to move on now to frequently asked questions. So one question that we get is, well, I'm pregnant. Can I file based off of my pregnancy for exceptional hardship? If you're pregnant, there's no qualifying relative until your baby is born. However, like if you're married and you're pregnant, of course, you're married to a U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident, you can file. And the fact that you are pregnant, that is a very strong form of hardship. And we've seen that USCIS gives considerable weight to the fact that you're pregnant. Melissa, you want to add anything there?
I think it's interesting because from my perspective, sometimes I see that client J1s, they very much have their life on hold to see if they get their waiver. But the best waiver cases, in my opinion, are J1s who are just living their life. They start their family, they buy a house. This adds all levels of hardship as opposed to J1s that are, saying, well, we have to wait until we have the waiver approved to start our family. Let's just stay renting. Let's not buy a house because you never know. But the best cases, of course, are J1s that are just living their life because they're forming these ties and adding to the exceptional hardship argument.
Another question that we get is, can you apply if you're out of data? So we have some situations where you might have overstayed your J1 visa, and you can still go ahead and apply for the J1 waiver, regardless of whether or not you are in status. But applying for the J1 waiver, sometimes people get confused and they think, oh, well, I'm applying for a J1 waiver. That's going to give me lawful status, and I'm going to be able to stay here lawfully once I file. So that's not the case. The J1 waiver specifically to get rid of the 2-year home residency requirement of having to go home for 2 years. So yes, you can apply, but it's not going to keep you here lawfully. Once you get an approval, you can look at other forms of maintaining lawful status. Ideally, you want to try to maintain your lawful status before you go out of status. So, with these processing times, other options might be like looking at applying for an O1 visa or F1 visa or trying to extend your J1. Anything else to add to that, Melissa?
No, I just think that's a nuanced type conversation that we have to speak individually with each client. So I think you said it perfectly. Ideally you would maintain your status. If you're already out of status, yes, you can file for your J1 waiver. It won't give you status. It'll only eliminate the 2-year requirement. And then you need to discuss what your options are for instance, applying for a marriage-based green card after your waiver is approved, something like that. But I think that's a conversation. It's good for everyone to have an overview of that. But, it's so nuanced that it's really something that needs to be discussed individually.
And then another question that we frequently get is, what kind of document do I need? So Melissa, could you talk about that? What kind of documents we typically are helpful in a case?
Definitely. So it really depends on what type of hardship arguments we are arguing. So for example, if we're arguing financial hardship, we need to see, what are you making here? What is your spouse making here? What are your employment prospects abroad? And there's multiple ways we can document that. For instance, you could do job searches in your home country and show me the pay range for what jobs they're pay, or show me that there's no openings available. Sometimes we'll have academic reach out to universities in their home country to see if they have open positions for them, and just that email correspondence showing that there are no openings for professors in their specialty, we would use that to show that there are no employment prospects for our J1 in their home country. What does the American or LPR spouse does here? What would they do there? Is there a language barrier? Is that why they wouldn't be able to obtain employment? What are your bills here? Your bank statements here? Just basically anything to show that you're doing okay financially here, but that would not be the case if you relocated to your home country. If we're arguing, for example, medical hardship, the first thing I like to do is really just get my hands on that American or LPR spouse's or child's medical records and look through them, because sometimes individuals will say, for example, oh, my child's healthy, my child doesn't have any medical issues. But then when I'm looking through the child's medical record, there are issues there that maybe the J1 doesn't consider serious, but we can use to help build off a case. Maybe food intolerances, referrals for different types of speech or occupational therapy, eczema, asthma. These are things that, for example, can be aggravated by conditions in the home country, and we can use that to sort of build a case. Sometimes there are minor delays or sensory processing issues that the child honestly would probably be fine whether the parent chose to treat it or not. But if you do start, for example, speech therapy or occupational therapy, it's something that's usually fun for the child, usually something that they enjoy, something that will help them, and also something we can use used to build the case, and that's something that J1s can pursue privately. So that would be an example of medical hardship. We would also, based on the records, write drafts for doctors to sign explaining, just in layman's terms, why there would be a hardship medically if that individual had to go back to the home country. Again, similar to the mental health hardship, we want a letter from the provider explaining that there's not just mere sadness here, that there are actual conditions and what the effect would be of either a relocation or of a separation. If we're talking about career hardship, we want to see what the American or LPR spouse's career is here and why they could not continue that in the home country. Sometimes that argument is as simple as, well, there's a language barrier, or that industry simply does not exist in the home country. So the type of paperwork we need really depends on the types of arguments that we're making. Those are just an example. The other part that I was going to say is, obviously, country condition hardship is usually an argument we make. This is research that we do on our own, specifically to document certain circumstances or certain issues. But every once in a while, clients are able to produce articles that we would not have found on our own. For example, articles that are written in their own native language, in their own native newspapers about certain issues that wouldn't necessarily be on our radar. So what we tell clients is we will be conducting our own research and are providing our own documentation to support an argument for country condition hardship. But if there's anything you feel that you specifically want to bring our attention to, by all means, provide it to us as well for us to take a look at. And, the paperwork is something that we have an initial list of all the paperwork we need. And then from there, we make suggestions and document it further, because the goal is really to present the strongest case possible. We really want to document this case as much as possible. We're very, very meticulous with our presentation. And, these cases are not easy to win, but I think one of the reasons we have such a high success rate and why we have such a strong referral-based business is because we are very meticulous in our presentation.
So I think Melissa brought up a couple of important points there. So one is like what we do an initial review and audit of the documents. And then from there, that will allow us to come up with additional ideas of, the fact that you've been to the doctor so many times might lead to a request for us to look at other medical documentation that you might have. So we may suggest additional documentation after what the initial documents you provide. And then sometimes, and I can speak from personal experience, my son has sensory processing, we go to OT, and some of those services, although they may not seem it's a big deal to the layperson, and you may not know how to communicate that, but these things have an impact on the overall well-being of the child. And if they are not addressed, then it can cause behavioral issues, it can cause learning issues. So these services also may not be available in your home country. So we've had cases where these types of special needs services are not available, and that's been a successful argument in the past.
I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. By watching this video, you're bettering yourself. By bettering yourself, you're bettering family. And by bettering your family, you're bettering the world. Thank you. Bye for now.